Welcome to the third and concluding session of our online capacity development workshop on disaster risk reduction strategies and digital governance for local resilience. We welcome you on behalf of CIFAL Jeju, UNITAR, on behalf of UNDESA, UNPOG, and UNDRR, Office for Northeast Asia and Global Education Training Institute in Korea. Next slide, please. For this afternoon session, we have several speakers. This is our third and last session. We are going to focus on developing DRR strategies. We will have several speakers. We have Dr. Sanjaya Bhatia, who will present us some Korean case studies on technology for DRR that we just recently documented in the Institute in collaboration with MOIS and TCS. We will have Mr. Alexander Mejia, who will give us a presentation on capacity development and raising awareness on DRR. And we have Ms. Sue Campbell, who is going to present us a very good example, country example, on how Cairns in Australia has used the tools that we present to you in this workshop and develop and review their local DRR strategies. I myself will start with a presentation on developing local DRR strategies, and my colleague, Ms. Mutharika Pruksapon, who is the global coordinator of the MCR 2030, she will present us a really introduction and practical introduction of the MCR 2030 dashboard. Next one, please. Next slide, please. This is the sequence as how we will structure the session this afternoon. I will moderate the whole afternoon session. We'll do the presentation, as I mentioned, followed by Ms. Dr. Mutharika Pruksapon, Mr. Sanjaya Bhatia, Mr. Alexander Mejia from UNITAR, Director of the Division for People and Social Inclusion in UNITAR headquarters in Geneva. And we will conclude with Ms. Sue Campbell. After that session, we go for the concluding remarks of the workshop. Next one, next slide, please. Thank you. So let me proceed with our first presentation, which I will provide to you. Thank you. So how we develop local DRR strategies. I will share the proposed approach and key steps that UNDRR is sharing with many local authorities around the world. But let me first start with the context and how we make the definition of disaster resilience. So the definition we use is from the Sendai framework for DRR, which is the ability to withstand and bounce back from both acute shocks. So we look at natural and man-made disasters, such as floods, earthquakes, hurricanes, wildfires, chemical spills, power outage, as well as biological hazards like pandemic. But also, the city should withstand and bounce back from chronic stresses occurring over long time scale. This can be groundwater depletion, deforestation, aging of buildings, unemployment, etc. So the idea here is you can see an image, you can look at roly-poly or the image of the bamboo trees in Japan, that they can bounce back, but they come back to where they were at the initial. If we make a fictional city, this is an image slide from the Global Assessment Report on Disaster Risk Reduction 2019, and we like very much to share. It is a fictional city, a Delta city, but it gives us very good elements of how we integrate risk governance. As you know, Delta cities can have different hazards. They can have floods, but they can have also landslides, soil erosion because of the ocean, surge storms, etc. So the idea here with this slide is that when we look and build the city, we make sure that the different elements, the different systems of the city are protected. If you look at energy, you use solar and hydro support grids, you put in different places. You have transportation. Transportation is here, is in a safe area. You need communications for continued economic growth of the city. Health, building, houses are also in areas located ashore, and also the housings. But what about food supply systems? They are also important areas. They are in high areas. And you have water supply systems, early warning systems. It's a city, if you can see the red areas, it's a system that also is doing risk reduction for floods and making actions. Here's some protections from the city, for the different hazards they can have. If we look at resilience, we need to think about that we are addressing the systems of systems. And we saw and we learned a lot from that, from COVID-19 pandemic. No single, and this is a message that we are repeatedly saying, and it's really evident through the pandemic that it is not the responsibility of one single agency. They cannot have the full mandate and the full resources to deal with a pandemic. They have to collaborate across different ministries and establish really the thinking of city of systems, the whole government approach, for example, for a pandemic. But at the city level, we have to also look at the different systems. And disaster risk reduction cannot be only the responsibility of the local DRR department in the municipality. It should be really a collaborative work with different departments, the ecosystems, the transportation, the public safety, the energy, the water, the communication, etc. So what are the characteristics of a disaster resilient city? We give the meaning of a city that have a strong leadership, and coordinations and responsibilities in disaster risk management are clearly identified. This means that they have coordination and good governance, and this governance also includes or are connected with the planning for the SDGs implementation, for example. It's a city that has knowledge about the hazards and the citizens know about it. They have a very good and adequate financial plan. Urban planning is carrying out and it's based on updated risk information, which we said always outdated because it is not a risk information of 5 years ago. This information should be really outdated. It's a city that take care of the national ecosystems and know the services and protect their ecosystems management with, for example, coordination and collaboration with other transboundary cities that share the park or the mountain. So it's a city that really take care of natural ecosystems. All institutions have a good understanding of disaster risk reduction. They build their capacities, they participate in trainings. The social connectedness and culture of mutual health is strengthened through the community. So the community receive messages, they have understanding, there is awareness. They are, for example, school safety programs, private sector workshops, etc. And also it is a city that maintains critical infrastructure resilience, so integrate risk reduction into the critical infrastructure. And lastly, have effective disaster response and also a post-disaster recovery, rehabilitation and reconstruction strategy. This disaster recovery, rehabilitation and reconstruction strategy should be done ahead of any disaster. So moving towards becoming a disaster resilient city, we need to first have a good understanding to raise awareness about disaster risk reduction and prepare the city and convene multi-actors, multi-stakeholder actors to understand, for example, to use the 10 essentials of the Making City MCR 2030. Also then use different tools. We have these tools available. We have shared last week. We work on the disaster resilience scorecard assessment. You get familiar with it. We explain the disaster scorecard assessment, but we also have the detailed version. We use the preliminary, but there is the detailed version. These tools will help us to assess the level of resilience of the city. It makes diagnostic tools. And with these tools, the city will be able to assess what is going well and what is going less well, on what needs to be improved. We have also the quick risk estimation tool, and in 2017 also, 18, we have the disaster health scorecard addendum. This is a good scorecard to help local authorities to assess the integration about health systems and disaster risk reduction systems in the city. So they are these tools, but there are many other tools that you can also learn through the MCR 2030 from other organizations that can help you to assess where you stand on risk assessment, understand your risk, identify your vulnerabilities, your gap, and respond to that risk. So once the city has done and used these tools, we go to develop the DRR strategy and action plan. So how we develop the DRR strategy, we look and try to, based on the gaps analysis, we prioritize what is possible, what are the interventions that that city really needs to conduct, and identify responsible parties, partners, and make sure evaluation indicators to assess your strategy. Then you have to have also an implementation, implementing your DRR strategy. You need to have to mobilize resources, implement those DRR actions that you have identified in your plan, and have a DRR monitoring, evaluation, and follow-up of your strategy. So that's the approach we use to develop a disaster risk reduction, become the city resilient using a disaster risk reduction strategy. Now, what is the difference? Sometimes we talk about local DRR strategies, we talk about local DRR action plan. So that it's important to have the good understanding and the difference between both. A local DRR strategy, you have a planning tool developed with a long-term perspective, you have a vision, you have guiding principles, you have your priority areas, you incorporate certain flexibility and period of evaluation, how your mechanisms of evaluation, and you will evolve and adapt and learn, apply the lessons learned when you have implemented your strategy and you adjust. A local DRR action plan is operational, is what you need to do, is give you orientation of what actions are going to be implemented. You need to define goals to reduce risk. You need to prioritize actions, make funds, make resources available to implement those actions, ensure there are roles and responsibilities, you allocate the budget I just mentioned, and you have a good timeline to make sure you will achieve those actions that you have put into your action plan. And you have indicators and mechanisms for monitoring. So the action plan is often part of the DRR strategy. When you look at the strategy content, you need to make sure you have preface, including in some cities, they have the regional council decision about the DRR strategy. You have an executive summary, an introduction, and in the introduction, the cities write why and how are we going to do this, let's respond to this question. And they give us in the introduction, what are the legal frameworks at national level, for example, and how the strategy, the local one, is linked to the national strategy objective and actions. At the end of the day, the national strategy is going to implement at the local level. So it has to be integrated, very well coordinated with the national strategy. Then you will write the current situations and trends, your challenges, the mission and objective, and you integrate the action plan, the one I just mentioned before, with the rationale, you propose your risk reduction measures, your actions. So exactly what are you going to do and how you will get there. Then you have to have also an implementation strategy, how you will ensure that the DRR strategy will be implementing, and you have a monitoring, evaluation, and reporting process in place. This is a very simple template that we use in our office. We use with many cities around the world. The examples of cities in Mongolia they have used. And it is breakdown through the 10 essentials of the NCR 2030. So the 10 essentials that we shared last week in our tool of the disaster resilience scorecard. So different areas, remember, from coordination, governance, budget, identifying your risk scenarios, urban design, critical infrastructure, all these areas, you break out through these areas. And based on your scorecard assessment, you can build this action plan in use. You will see which are the areas that you have to improve, what actions are required, what would be the indicators you need to put in smart indicators, usually we use, the time frame I mentioned, and who will take responsibility in the local authority, but also maybe other departments. Sometimes we have seen cities that have given a very good responsibility because this is something that is done at national level. So they give the responsibility of a department at national level, but they work with the national level authority for that particular action. There is a publication we have which calls Words into Actions, and this Words into Actions for developing local DRR strategies is a very good guidance. I will suggest, I will put into the chat the link after my presentation. So you can have a look on more in depth on how you can develop the local DRR strategies. There is guidance. Very important to mention is that it has to be aligned again to the national DRR strategy and should follow 10 elements of the Sendai framework alignment. And what are these 10 elements? So in the 10 elements, you have to prevent the creation of new risk, reducing existing risk, and strengthen economic, social health, and environmental resilience in your strategic vision and goals of your DRR local strategy. When you're going to do the actions of the strategy, you need to also look and integrate the 4 priorities of the Sendai framework, from understanding disaster risk to strengthen disaster risk governance, investing in resilience, working with the private sector, for example, enhance DRR preparedness for effective response. And I mentioned that the DRR strategy has to have guiding principles. And those guiding principles should follow policy coherence on disaster risk reduction with the Sustainable Development Goals, with climate change, the SDG I mentioned, and the Paris Agreement. And finally, monitoring. You need to have targets, indicators, and mechanisms to follow up. Quick examples. I am going to finish soon my presentation, but I would like to share some very interesting examples from some cities with whom we have been working. One is Lisbon. Lisbon developed this beautiful publication, as you can see, Lisbon Resilient Action Plan. They used this methodology that I just shared with you for the formulation of their DRR strategy. So first, they look at the risk. They use the 10 essentials that we learned last week, and they did the assessment how they are for each of the 10 essentials. Then they look at the different impacts of all data they have, the data they have in 2015, and the strategy, the impacts for 2016 to 2020 strategy. After they look at the impacts, very interesting is to see the projects. As mentioned, first they use the 10 essentials. Well, this is the indicators, the questions that you had into the scorecard assessment. At that time, it was another version with more layers. It was the draft urban local indicators. Today, we have the indicators from the scorecard. So by answering the questions of the scorecard, you will identify the gaps that needs to be addressed. They use the same. They identify the actions they require to address those gaps. And at the end, very interesting what Lisbon did is that they convert this into projects that they can find financial support for implementing those projects. This looks a bit complicated, but it's not. Here in the left, you see the essentials, the 10 essentials, then many gaps. You see, when you do the scorecard, you find many gaps. And several actions that they address different gaps. And at the end, they map the projects. They came up with only 6 projects, and the 6 projects cover all the actions they identify to make their city resilient. One of the projects, for example, was to develop a resilient platform to build and maintain data. And that data services is also able to service organizations in the city, but also schools, research centers, the citizens, and how that was the objective, one of the projects, and they promote through the Lisbon SMPC in articulation with the National Authority for DRR. They expected 2 consultants to work for 8 months and a certain period of time. As you see, the time frame is there. And they have a specific cost of 200,000 euros for implementing this project. This project will cover several of the gaps they have to address. And they include the citizens, the research center, the school, the social capacity, technological, the city, and geopolitical. It's a very interesting example. Other cities like Tegucigalpa here in the example of Honduras, is that they develop the different, they did the same, you can see the same different, using the same tools, and they make the assessment. In Tegucigalpa it was led by the mayor. So it was a lot of leadership in order to engage different entities to develop and make the assessment. And it's very important for you, and if you work with your city, that you really reach out to the mayor and bring this to his attention, that this is important that the city develop or review the local DRR strategy. They identified the gaps with 4 strategic pillars. For this city in Honduras, for example, one of the pillars was resilience, the physical resilience on infrastructure. The second one was spatial resilience, which is all about urban design, building codes. The third was pillar they developed is functional resilience, so financial. And the fourth is organizational resilience. So they look at local capacities and participation of the cities. That's the 4, you can see them, the 4 pillars they develop for their city, and they look at the gaps and the actions accordingly with the 4 pillars. Why I'm sharing this good practice is because you have the methodology, you have the tools, but you have to also contextualize to the needs of the city and how the city vision is stated. When you use, this is the report of the scorecard assessment. It's very interesting for this city in Ecuador. They use the scorecard assessment as we share the seconds of our session through a multi-stakeholder workshop, and they publish, and they use the same cover of the scorecard assessment, and it was supported and adopted. The plan, it was also very reviewed several times for submission and approval. And the intervention of the citizen is very important, because then it's more easy to implement the strategy. My last case example is in Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia, how we coordinate, how we did this assessment, the scorecard assessment, the workshops. We brought those partners from the National Authority, NEMA, and the local authorities together, and also they requested several civil society participants and the office of the mayor. So for Ulaanbaatar city, for example, it's a very big city with different risks. Every district have different risks. And when we start to do the workshops, we face the difficulties of using the scorecard assessment in such a big city. So what we did is that we break out the scorecard assessment through the 9 districts. So the 9 districts collect their data, their information, and we came together all the districts' results and develop and make the final assessment of the self-assessment of the city. And then each of the districts look at what are the key areas they have to implement into their action plans for building the DRR local strategy, which was developed in collaboration with our consultant and then adopted after the Asia Pacific Ministerial Conference in Mongolia by Ulaanbaatar City. It's a very good example, and they have also implemented the local DRR strategy, and it is not a document paper, but also they start to make the actions and make it reality, the scorecard assessment and the development of the local DRR strategy. So I hope with this presentation, you have the basic understanding of how we use the tool of last week to assess the gaps and develop your local DRR strategy. The final assignment of this course from UNDRR perspective is that you try to do a local DRR action plan for your city, not the strategy, the action plan. And I will give you more details for the final assignment by email to the group. So you will have all the guidance and criteria. Thank you very much for your attention and for this presentation. I see there are plenty of chat questions. I will answer through the next speakers while the others will be presenting. And I'm very happy to give the floor to my colleague, Mutarika Pruksapon, who is Program Officer in UNDRR Getty and also the Global Coordinator of the MCR 2030. Mai will share with you an introduction to the MCR 2030 dashboard, and she will link her presentation with what Sanjaya Bhatia presented on day one, which he gave us the overview of the MCR 2030. Over to you, Mai. Mai, you are mute.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, wherever you are. I hope that you can hear me clearly and also see the screen that I'm sharing. And thank you, Anna, for introducing me here. I'll be spending pretty much 15 minutes, the next 15 minutes to introduce you to the Making City Resilient 2030 dashboard. And basically, a few of the colleagues already have introduced to you about the Making City Resilient 2030. But here, the dashboard is the tool that we are using to facilitate the interaction of the partners and the cities engaged in the MCR 2030. So allow me to spend the next 15 minutes to talk about it, and also to lead you to how to sign up and join the MCR 2030 using the dashboard. And more importantly, to be able to see what we actually are expecting to be able to do on the dashboard itself. So just a little bit of the recap. You also have heard about the Making City Resilient 2030 overview from my colleague Sanjaya Bhatia on the first session. It's a product of our 10 years experience working with the cities under the Making City Resilient campaign over the past decades, and also from the experience of the city himself, and also the partners working with urban resilience agenda in the previous years. We know that cities are at the different stages of the resilience, and we know that cities also can improve by utilizing different tools to progress. For example, the tools that Anna just introduced about the disaster resilience scorecard for cities to improve the assessment, then to be able to populate the information to develop the disaster risk reduction strategies. Then a lot of the questions would always come like, after you develop the plan, then what do you do? This Making City Resilient 2030 therefore capture this pathway or the progress of making your city resilience into this resilience roadmap and broken it down into a three-stage, stage A, B, and C, and for cities to be able to focus from understanding the concept into planning better and also to be able to implement better. We ultimately want to see the city moving along this resilience roadmap from understanding to planning to implementation and to eventually becoming resilient. And the more information about the Making City Resilient 2030 can actually be seen from this website, MCR 2030 website, mcr2030.undrr.org, which is a public-facing website. Anyone who access to this URL can basically just go into and learn more about what the MCR 2030 is all about, the concept, the details about the resilience roadmap, what are in the 3 stages, where do we work, like what are the 5 geographic location that the MCR 2030 is covering. And also, if you are clicking on these 2 buttons that we highlighted in the red rectangles, join MCR 2030 and get ready, you will be led to this page about how to join the MCR 2030. And there are also the guidance, instruction for how to join as a city and how to join as the participating entity. And the joining happens through the dashboard by clicking this button in the red rectangle, which I'll be walking you through in a few minutes. But before we go into the walkthrough of the dashboard, a few words that probably would be good to introduce to you now so that you are familiar with the terminologies we are normally referring to when we are talking about the MCR 2030 and especially about the dashboard. Firstly, the dashboard itself, what it is. So as opposed to the public-facing website of the MCR 2030, the dashboard is a closed online space only accessible by the participating cities and the organizations joining the MCR 2030. They have to use the credentials to log in and sign into, which we call that the Prevention Web account. If you are familiar with preventionweb.net, it's the same username that you can use to access or joining your cities and the organizations in the MCR 2030. Now, who can access? There are 2 big categories of the user of the MCR 2030 dashboard. Firstly, the participating entity. It's another term that we're using to call partners or the organizations offering or have the expertise to be able to help the cities to move along this resilience roadmap. It can be national government, it can be National Association of Municipality, any development agencies, NGOs, civil service organizations, academia, institutes, networks, private entity, private sector, UN agencies, or international organizations. So any entity that are interested and have the expertise to be able to support local governments in one way or the other are welcome to join. Another big group is, of course, the city or local government themselves. And when we're saying making cities resilient, we are not focusing only on the big size city, the capital cities or the metropolitan, but we use the word cities to also refer to the subnational local governments, authorities. It can be the cities themselves, it can be a province, can be state, can be municipality or any subnational administrative unit of your country. Then another term that we often refer to is the word service. Basically, what we are calling the service is the expertise that the participating entity or the partners are able to offer to the cities. And this can be training, can be workshops, can be technical assistance, it can be consultancy service, it can be any kind of tools. And disaster resilience scorecard for cities, for example, is one of the tools, one of the services that UNDRR is also providing for city in the MCR 2030. And it's accessible also for the cities in the dashboard. Now, once you click to join the MCR 2030 in the website, it will lead you to this different URL, mcr2030 dashboard.undrr.org. And here you will be able to select who you are to join. And of course, like we have this here, citizens, participating entity, and local governments. But unfortunately, at this moment, the MCR 2030 is not yet open for individuals or individuals who signed up into the system. We encourage, if you are a part of any entity or organizations, you can sign your organization up in this MCR 2030. We'll start first with looking into how a city can join MCR 2030. Here is also the URL that you can access the guidance, the how-to, the step-by-step explanation on how the city can join MCR 2030. The first step is definitely to take the stage assessment. What is it like? Here is, you can also access this stage assessment via the MCR 2030 website or this URL. It's basically a very simple 15 questions with a yes and no answer. And if you complete this question set, you will be able to derive to the answer of which stage you are belonging to, or like which stage A, B, or C that you are already focusing on. And so in that way, when you signed up into the MCR 2030 dashboard, and you know the stage, you will be able to access the service and be able to interact with the partners that is matching to the level and the progress of where your city is along the resilience roadmap. And in that way would be very more straight to the point of how your city can move forward along the resilience roadmap. Once you get the complete the questions, the state assessments, you get your stage. In that page, you will be able to download the template of the commitment letter, and in which you should get it signed by the mayor or the executive director of your cities. For the cities who are part of the MCR campaign in the last decade, and also the cities who already have been certified with the ISO 37123 on resilient city indicators, you don't have to prepare the commitment letter. And but the ISO 37123 certified cities can use the certificate of ISO to use in replacement of the letter of commitment. Once you get the letter signed, basically you have it handy in the file. And when you click join the MCR 2030 via this link, basically you have to upload that letter of commitment or the ISO 37123 certificate in the dashboard. Now, it's important also for you to decide who from your local governments to sign up to the dashboard, because basically if any other person of your city already have signed up, please don't sign it up again, because otherwise you will have the two profiles of the same city in the system, and it will reduce the probability of accessing the services. Now, if the first person who have signed your city up in the system, they will be able to add more members of your team onto the same city profile and be able to see exactly what other team member is saying and be able to interact the city more comprehensively. Now, on this page, definitely select local government and then move on. You will be prompted to log in with the Prevention Web account. So if you already have the username and password from your previous use of the Prevention Web .net, you can use the same password to log in. But if you do not already have that credentials, you have to register and get the username and password of the Prevention Web, use it to log in. Click login, and the system will prompt you to this image in the bottom that MCR dashboard is requesting permissions to access your account. Basically click authorize here, and so the system will be connecting your account with the dashboard, and you will be able to continue to input your city information and profile. I would recommend that the city put as much information as you can, because this will help the partners and the participating entity of the MCR 2030 to understand more about your cities and be able to contact you and be able to facilitate more communication with you on a specific service that may be beneficial to your city. Now, if you're an organization wanting to join, you can also refer to this guidance, the how-to guidance for participating entity through this link here. And go to the dashboard, select participating entity, and do confirm that no one else has already signed up your organization in this dashboard. And again, use the Prevention Web login to get connected to the system and log in, and select the type of participating entity, which I will be explaining in the next slide. And once you're in the system, make sure that you list your basic organization profile, list the details, and also list your particular service. So let's say if you are a training institute and you have 3 training courses available for 3 different purposes, you can list each of those training individually as in 3 services, so that each of the training is tailored to one particular area of interest or one particular area of expertise, and it will help very much for the cities to be able to get in touch with you for that particular service with that particular details. Now, there are 3 types of participating entity that I would like to highlight here. Basically, we are classifying the partners or participating entity of the MCR 2030 into 3 categories. Firstly, the core partners. These are 11 organizations that have co-created the MCR 2030 in the previous years and co-launched the initiative together. So C40 Cities, eClay, IFRC, JICA, UCLG, Resilient City Network, UN Habitat, UN DRR, and etc. here. Now, another category, which I believe also will be one of the bigger group of partners, are the supporting entities. These are non-commercial entities with specialized area of expertise that can actually help the cities to move along this resilience roadmap. And we categorize that particular field of support for city into 12 thematic areas. And national governments, national associations, academia, CSO, NGO, and media and international institutions, etc., can join MCR 2030 as these supporting entities. On the other hand, for the private sector, for example, or the entity that may charge service to help cities along this resilience roadmap, can also join MCR 2030 and select specialist service providers. The engagement between the SSPs and the cities will be through the local government's procurement process, but the dashboard will give the opportunity for the cities to be able to find this private sector entity better, and also for the private sector to also open up new market and be able to get in touch with the cities. Now, list your service. This is one of the very key critical emphasis that I would want to highlight here if you are the supporting entities or participating entities joining the MCR 2030. And this is because when you list the service, you will be asked to also classify your service along these 12 thematic areas. So for example, if I highlight, for example, the disaster resilience scorecard for cities, which Anna has introduced to you from last week, and also and it helps to develop the disaster resilience strategies. We classify the disaster resilience scorecard as a tool to help to improve the diagnostic skill for planning. So once we list this as part of the services on the dashboard, cities who are in stage B and are looking for particular tools or support for them to be able to improve the diagnostic skills for planning, we'll be able to find disaster resilience scorecard for cities and see the details about it and be able to interact and get in touch with our office for further collaboration, further support on this end. So if you have the service, I recommend and I encourage you to think of how your tools and services matching with these 12 categories of support and list them on the MCR 2030 so that the cities can find them easier. Lastly, before I end, what can then we do on the dashboard? So if you are the cities, basically they can access the services that the partners and the participating entities have been listing, and they can browse and filter to see which type of services are matching with the stage that they are. So if I'm a state, like I said, if I'm a stage B cities, I'm looking for tools to help me to improve the risk analysis, to improve the planning of the DRR resilience strategies, then I will be able to search for a particular service matching this needs that my city is having. Of course, it also helps not only to find the service, but to also to see who could be the potential partners that the city can get in touch with. The cities will be able to also share the insights if they have completed certain steps within this stage A, B, and C, to share with other cities what they have done, which service they use, what were the experience of the cities using this service, and how they progress along the resilience roadmap, and be able to move from stage A to B, from B to C, and see the pathway, and be able to monitor the progress of becoming a more resilient city. At the same time, participating entities can publicize your service and be able to search for the cities, and of course open new opportunity to interact with the cities and be able to see the impact of your services with these cities in moving along the resilience roadmap. And there will be many more features to come also that you can also interact in the dashboard. When the city signed into the dashboard, they will see the different views from the participating entity views on the dashboard. Basically, the dashboard will also be giving the resilience roadmap, which also will emphasize, like, this is an example, the case here, I'm signing in as a stage C cities. You can see the progress bar here. They're at stage C. And they have complete also the step in A, B, and C. And now, like, there are also details for them to be able to see, okay, they should, if you're in stage C, they should continue to increase access to finance, to focus on using the nature-based solutions, to continue to build the resilience infrastructure, and etc. And hence, we'll be able to browse the service on the left side by the category and see the type of service that many of the partners or participant entity may be providing for them to be able to complete these steps and you know, the critical of what they should be focusing on to be able to enhance the resilience in the future. And yeah, so that's the end of the brief introduction of the dashboard. And if you have any question or comments, then you can also get in touch with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mai. You can leave the last slide there just for participants to take your email. We have several questions in the Q&A, so I welcome you to go through the next few minutes that you are joining us to help us to respond some of the key questions. There's important information about MCR 2030, that this is a global initiative from many, many partners, as Sanjaya Bhatia shared. So this is a way for collaboration, a platform, as my Dr. Pruksapon shared, a platform for learning, co-learning, and implementing your DRR strategies. Thank you again, Dr. Pruksapon, and everyone has taken note on your email for questions, more detail, and if you can answer some of them. We move on of today. Thank you. We move on to the next presenter. We are going to look at concrete cases on Korean cases on technology application for disaster risk reduction. Mr. Sanjaya Bhatia, head of our Office for Northeast Asia Global Education and Training Institute, will share with us these cases, which are documented from our institute in collaboration with MOIS, the Ministry of Interior and Safety of Korea, and the Trilateral Cooperation Secretariat. Sanjaya, over to you.
Thank you, Anna, and welcome again to all the participants to the final day. Of course, there is some more homework to be done, so you have been told about that already. I'm just quickly going to share some applications of technology for DRR. I think you can see my screen now. One is Korea has introduced this flood forecasting system. So basically what it does is it uses water gauges in the rivers plus satellite also, and it provides the automatic alarm system. So there is the monitoring station which is watching the river, and it has inbuilt triggers. So when there is a rise in water level beyond a certain level, a trigger, automatically the alarm station starts sending out the alarms, which are sound alarms like sirens. so that people can know that the flood is coming and they can evacuate. I think this would also be very helpful. As you know, in some cases, there have recently been glacial floods. Those glacial lakes have burst and sudden floods have been caused. So watching the water level and then having downstream the siren systems is a very good means of managing that. So this has been used in a number of countries also, in Philippines, in Laos, PDR, in Vietnam, and the idea is that it is simple to use, it is easy to set up, it is not expensive, and it is very, very effective. As you can see, it's been being installed from all the way from 2013 to 2017 and being used continuously. Another issue is the what is known as the safe net. So now you are, many of you may be aware that whenever emergency services operate, they are all on different bandwidths, different frequencies. They have different equipment, and inter-agency communication becomes a challenge. Now, what they have tried to do here in Korea is a very interesting example of bringing everyone on the same frequency so that they all use the same equipment and they all can exchange data and information with each other live during the disaster and during the response. So this is called PSLTE, Public Safety Long-Term Evolution. So you have on your mobile phones, you have the LTE, and that is the technology that is used in the mobile phone. So now this, what it tries to do is bring all these services, which means voice, data, video, everything on equipment, including the mobile phones. So the fire services, the police, the electricity services, the medical, gas, coast guard, military, local government, all are on the same platform. They can, whoever reaches the site first or whoever is the responder can start showing video. They can start transmitting data. They can give voice reports. They can give data streams, all kinds of information immediately, and that would reach all of them. So for example, if it is the local government which is seeing a disaster unfolding, they can send out messages and data as picture, as video, and as voice, and it will reach everyone, including military, coast guard, gas services, electricity, police, fire services, everyone. So everyone will get. And this is, of course, very, very good for the response. It will make it much more efficient. Then we all live in the world of COVID now. And here what they have done is they've developed an app to manage the quarantine system. So as you know, many countries require incoming persons, incoming travelers to quarantine. It varies from country to country. Somewhere it's 5 days, somewhere it's 10 days, somewhere it's 14 days, some places 21 days. But it's very difficult to monitor. And in Korea, for example, you have 14-day quarantine, but you get the option to go home and quarantine there. So if you are a resident of Korea, you are coming from outside, you can go home and you can quarantine there. But then, of course, the government needs to monitor and make sure that you are following the quarantine. So what they have is an app, again, on the mobile phone. And you do your self-diagnosis firstly, put in your body temperature twice a day. mention whether you have some throat trouble, coughing or other symptoms. And then the system automatically watches your movements in the sense that if you are violating the quarantine, then a message will go to the case officer. So this is what the case officer will see. So this is the self-diagnosis screen, map showing the location, so where that person is who is in quarantine. And then they will know whether the person has checked in every day, twice a day, with the self-diagnosis details of temperature and so on. And also they monitor. So if the mobile phone is not being used or not being moved for a very long time, they will call you and ask you to show a video where you are, to ensure that you are not violating the quarantine. And if the mobile phone moves out of that location, then of course there is an automatic alert going to the case officer. So these are all measures to protect the neighborhoods and the communities from spread of disease. And generally they have worked quite well. But the technology makes it possible. Without the technology, it is almost very difficult to do this. And again, they can even see the entire neighborhood or entire country or entire province or entire city information on the screen, which helps also for the long-term planning. Then there is the last case is about the using drones. So there are a lot of drones in the private sector. A lot of people have drones for recreation purposes. Many people keep drones for photography, for camera work, whatever. So there are a large number of drones. Now, what here they have done is that they have linked these drones with the emergency services. So for example, if there is a accident on a highway, then the local authorities know who are the people with drones, and they can ask them, can you fly your drone over the accident site and give us a visual, for example. So they have organized this in a very formal and systematic manner, and this way, even before the first responders reach, they know, okay, in this area there has been an accident on a bridge, and we know that so and so has a drone there, so we can ask them. They can request, can you put your drone there? So they will check the flight space, check the drone, the aircraft, and then send it there to the site, and make a film, record the damage situation, and transmit the information. So what this will do is, of course, it's a kind of a public-private partnership, and it will help in reducing the risk in society, and it will make the emergency services much more efficient. So with that, I end my these few cases, just to give you a flavor of what application of technology for DRR looks like. Over.
Thank you, Sanjaya. There are many questions for you in the Q&A. Let me also inform participants that we have, I remember we used last week, the Risk-Informed Governance and Innovative Technology for DRR and Resilience Toolkit that has been developed in collaboration with UNPOG and UNDRR, and it is available. My colleague Samuel Dana is going to give you the link to reach, or you can find in the workspace where there are more cases that you can find on technology application for DRR. Thank you, Sanjaya. And let me introduce now our next speaker, Mr. Alexander Mejia, Director of the Division of People and Social Inclusion and Head of CIFAL Global Network. Alexander Mejia is going to present us a presentation on capacity building and raising awareness. Mr. Mejia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
We do.
Thanks.
Very well.
Very kind. Before I begin very briefly to Sanjaya, to you and to the colleagues at UNDRR in Incheon, my respect for putting this together. And it is always a pleasure to cooperate with you. My team on this topic led by Ms. Estrella Merlos speaks greatly of you and your professionalism, and today I can see why again. So I have a presentation, hopefully to give you UNITAR's perspective on capacity building. After all, we are the UN agency with a mandate to work on capacity building, training, and research. And perhaps at the end, some ruminations on how to build back better. Our United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, has repeatedly called world leaders, and particularly the whole United Nations system, exactly to that, to build back better as soon as we enter the post-COVID era, which hopefully will be soon. We need to eliminate the mistakes of the past. And one of them, one of the top priorities indeed, should be disaster resilience. So let me begin now the presentation. If we can go to the next slide. My name is Alex Mejia again. I'm a division director at UNITAR, and I'm from Ecuador in Latin America. By the way, thank you for what you did, UNDRR, in Guayaquil, my home city, in that action plan that you helped the municipality and other actors to build. I'm a witness to that, and I know it works. Very good. For the participants that sees us or join us from other places and don't know what is UNITAR, there you have it on the screen. I'm not going to get into the details. I'll just tell you that we were created by the United Nations General Assembly in 1963 to develop individual, institutional, organizational capacities of countries, particularly developing countries. We have a focus on three types of countries. Perhaps you know the acronyms: LDCs, least developed countries; landlocked, least developed countries; and SEEDs, also small island development states. We basically offer very many seminars, workshops, tool kits, and so on and so forth. Next, please. This is important, I think, for all of us as simply a common individual, but also for us as the United Nations systems to project to the global audience. The Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development calls for this holistic approach for development, in which we have issues related to peace, to people, to planet, to prosperity. And UNITAR has structured its work on those 4 areas plus one, which is multilateral diplomacy. Why? In 1963, actually in 1965, when we actually began our first seminar at the time, we understood that for developing member states to engage in equal terms with developed nations, multilateral diplomacy and what happens at the UN, negotiation, engagement, and particularly the interaction, technical interaction and technical cooperation, it's important. So we are perhaps known because we focus a lot on training diplomats from the development world. Next, please. Here, just to conclude this initial part, we are very proud of these numbers. Last year was a record year. You wouldn't believe it. When the COVID pandemic started in earnest in March for us, and the first lockdown happened in Switzerland. I'm speaking from Geneva, Switzerland. I actually told my Director General, Assistant Secretary General, Nikhil Seth, one of the persons known as one of the fathers of the Sustainable Development Goals, of his previous work out of New York with Amina Mohammed and so on. I actually told Mr. Seth, I think we should reduce the numbers that we have planned for this year. And what happened, because of distance learning methodologies, and particularly Zoom and WebEx, is that we actually grew aggressively in the total number of beneficiaries. There you see 322,000 people that took training with us or engaged with us in some way or form. And next, to begin getting into the matter, if you can go to the next slide, please. please visit us. There are many training opportunities for free, the vast majority actually, or engage with one of these centers. We have 21, we call them CFAL, International Centers for the Training of Authorities and Leaders. It's a French acronym, but there are 21 CFAL centers around the world. They are hubs for capacity building and knowledge sharing at the local level in the cities where they are, and sometimes also at the national level in the countries where they are. And I wanted to add here something that UNDRR is becoming an example for, and it's the fact that the United Nations, I'm a former diplomat myself, and I always understood the UN as this intergovernmental organization working at the national level, at the federal level. So the UN is perhaps recently, the last decade and a half, no more, working at the subnational and at the local level. UNDRR really is an example for us, the same as UN Habitat, in working at the local level as well. UNITAR decided to do so, creating this network 16, 17 years ago to work with cities to build capacity in cities. So if you are in one of these cities and you are listening today, feel free to join us, engage, write a call. I'm very pleased, by the way, to see that we have here Ambassador Choi. Ambassador Choi from the Republic of South Korea is actually a distinguished career diplomat that recently took over the leadership of CFAL Jeju, the beautiful Jeju island of South Korea. So, Excellency, it's a pleasure to see you here again. Very good. So that's UNITAR. There are also some ruminations that I wanted to share with you on risk reduction proper, but Ana Cristina Thurlon did a magnificent job, so I'm not going to repeat that. Just this little phrase under the picture, that there is no such thing as a natural disaster, only natural hazards, and that indeed, if you read the slide, prevention is possible. Very many things that actually happen and that cause lives, human lives, and destruction of infrastructure and so on are preventable. So we have to build resilience. Then next slide, please.
Mr. Mejia, can you speak a little bit louder? The participants would like to hear your voice. They are from very remote areas and locations. So if you can speak a little bit louder, thank you.
Yes. So thank you. After that presentation on UNITAR, I simply wanted to say that on disaster risk reduction from our perspective, it's important to understand that there is no such a thing as a natural disaster, only natural hazards. And I say that I didn't want to repeat what you say, Ana Cristina. What you indeed share was very comprehensive and holistic as a definition. But if you go to the next slide, please. The Sendai framework is what guides us in our cooperation at the local level. A big part of it with UNDRR and in general, by understanding what actually is the Sendai framework. So if you go to the next slide, in this overview, I simply wanted to, again, for people joining us that perhaps are not so familiar with it, explain this slide briefly. The Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015-2030 basically outlines 7 global targets. These reductions that you see going down on the center of the slide, and this increase or strengthening that you see to the right. Global disaster mortality to reduce the number of affected people globally, reduce direct economic loss in relation to GDP, and reduce disaster damage to critical infrastructure and disruption of basic services, joined by an increase in the number of countries with national and local disaster risk reduction strategies. Let me stop there. You heard from Ana Cristina and her colleagues the important efforts that UNDRR is doing there. But there are also some capacity building opportunities that you will have at UNITAR and with UNITAR and UNDRR Getty. So I again encourage you, this is the main objective of this presentation, to go and take our courses. our websites will give you more information on that. And to conclude, this slide on the Sendai framework, the Sendai framework also postulates a substantial enhancement of international cooperation to developing countries and to increase the availability of and the access to multi-hazard early warning systems. Let's go to the next, please. Next slide. Yes. There is a particular e-learning course that I want to call your attention to, is this e-learning course on resilience of local governments, a multi-sectoral approach to integrate public health and disaster risk management. And this allows me to echo what previous speakers have mentioned on the realities that we live through the COVID pandemic. So we all understand that public health now is a very important part of resilience and disaster risk management. We all understand that there should be preparedness when it comes to pandemics and public health. I want to remind you that just 10 days, 11 days ago, the Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros, joined several prime ministers and presidents to call for the need to sign a new convention, a treaty, on how to react in a coordinated manner to global pandemics. And this is important because it cannot happen as it is happening. Just to give you an example, the issue of quarantines that a previous speaker touched. What is the rationale to have 5 days versus 10 days versus 15 days versus 21 days, depending on the country or the city? It doesn't make any sense. The approach to vaccination, the approach to health emergency services, hospitalizations, protocols, and so on and so forth. So the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction should also be seen in conjunction with the Sustainable Development Goals as a roadmap that will help us to build resilience on public health as well. And I invite you to take this e-learning course of UNITAR and UNDRR. Next, please. If you see here, we have this another e-learning course on resilience of local governments, a multi-sectoral approach to integrate public health in disaster risk management. There is a scorecard that will be important that we do. I want to thank again the Global Education and Training Institute, Getty of UNDRR out of Incheon, and at the same time the WHO, the World Health Organization, for empowering UNITAR to do this thing. And all of these e-learnings, as I say, they are on our websites. They are free. Just invest some time and you'll see how your own understanding, personal understanding of personal performance, wherever you work, or just as a common citizen, can be strengthened and can be increased. Next, I want to wrap up this by remembering and paying tribute to 135 million people that have suffered or are suffering with the COVID. And particularly to, you see, when you see this number of deaths, 2,927,000 plus, that means 2,127,000 families and friends and teams and communities grieving. So as of yesterday, these are the numbers, the official numbers that we use at the United Nations come from the WHO dashboard. You simply go to World Health Organization and you'll see that. But I wanted to mention this because if you go to the next slide, please, on COVID response, I just mentioned before the need to create a global architecture, a global convention, a global treaty, a global protocol on how to react to pandemics. But also allow me to say that the coronavirus disease is a reminder of the urgent need to cooperate not only about, amongst countries or member states of the United Nations, but also across borders, sectors, and generations. When I mention generations, to build resilience in a community, I want to say this in a proper manner, in a delicate manner, no offense to anyone. On the news in several countries, that the younger generation perhaps feel less the need to actually comply with, for instance, lockdown regulations in several countries, in several cities, and just go about their business. But the premise is destroyed. And the premise is that until everyone is safe, no one is safe. So to work through generations to build resilience on how to deal with global pandemics is also important. And next, I believe I wanted to conclude with explaining what are the United Nations priorities for post-COVID transition. Our Secretary General Antonio Guterres launched this very important list of priorities and tasks, and that is important to share here also because it has an impact on building resilience and doing disaster risk preparedness. First and foremost, of course, is to strengthen the COVID-19 response. Second is to focus on gender equality. If this pandemic has brought to the surface some fractures of societies in terms of gender equality, and we must see it as a priority. Then to focus, number three, on sustainable and inclusive recovery, and to continue working on climate and biodiversity, poverty and inequality, to do this reset on the 21st century with Build Back Better, as I mentioned at the beginning, and then to focus on disarmament, peace, human rights, and at the end, digital emerging technologies. Read to the right. Disasters cause $150 billion of damage every year across the globe. This cannot be ignored. And more important than this is the human suffering. So let's remember that women and children are 14 times more likely to die in natural disasters than men, and that inclusive and accessible post-pandemic recovery requires indeed international collaboration. There is, in the next slide, a UN roadmap for post-recovery. I simply want to invite you to read about it. If you Google it, literally, as a UN roadmap for post-COVID recovery, you will find some resources at un.org. If you go to the next one, there is a focus on local governance as part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and the two particular goals that focus on them, goal number 9 and goal number 11. And several other targets under the goals that I invite you to read about. And then if you go to the next one, I don't want to abuse the time that has been given to me, but I simply want to say at the center of this slide that UN Habitat has proposed a post-COVID-19 response plan that focuses on supporting local governments and community-driven solutions in informal settlements, to providing urban data, evidence-based mapping, and knowledge for informed decisions, and to mitigating economic impact and initiate recovery. Why is this important? Because you just heard right before Sanjay a presentation on making cities resilient, the global campaign. Please join it. It makes a difference, and I am a witness to that. And the last slide, I think, is the next one, which is lessons learned. And this one allow me to actually share correctly because this is the end of my presentation. The objective of this is to emphasize that interagency coordination at the national level and harmonization at the local and also global levels must become a priority. Interagency coordination means anything that is within the architecture of the public sector, but beyond that too, because you need civil society organizations and the private sector has a role. The development of public policies to address significant global challenges require greater attention from both developed and developing countries. More than ever, the goals set out in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development must become the basis and rationale for all public policy. And it's a pity to tell you here that is something something negative that the pandemic brought, in addition to the health and social crisis that has emanated from COVID, is the fact that the virtuous cycle, the advance that we had in the fight against global poverty and the improvement of living standards around the world, the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals advance has been halted. And we understand why governments had to dedicate very many resources that were invested before on sustainable development to deal with the pandemic. So we have to remember that Agenda 2030 is still important and we have a decade to work on. Then the COVID-19 pandemic has more than ever shown the changing risk environment, as well as the systemic and overlaying nature of risks that affect and threaten all sectors. It's a bigger understanding of what a risk is. Hence, it has reinforced the call for multi-sectoral, multi-hazard, and preventive and participatory approaches that consistently integrate disaster, climate, and crisis risk management for strengthening the resilience of people and the ecosystems they depend on in a sustainable manner. So let me conclude by inviting you again to use the capacity building resources that we put at your disposal and to read more about these things that I just mentioned here, because we need to understand that we are all in this together in building resilience so we can prevent disasters. Thank you very much. Back to you, Cristina.
Thank you, Mr. Mejia, for your comprehensive presentation. Very interesting. I recommend participants to join the Resilience of Local Governments course on multi-sectoral approach to integrate public health and disaster risk management. This is the way that we can integrate the work of the public health sector with the DRR actors. Also, we have some questions for you in the Q&A, but I will ask you one question that one participant is making about UNITAR Hub in India. Do you have one, or do you are planning anything in India? We have many participants in this course from India. And also a comment on the NGOs that plays a vital role for COVID-19 pandemic. Over to you, Mr. Mejia.
Yes, thank you very much. We used to have a CFAL center in Bangalore that unfortunately was closed, but we very much look forward to reopening it actually. But I wanted to say two things. India is very important for the Institute. An important percentage of our beneficiaries come from India. And our executive director, our United Nations Assistant Secretary General, Mr. Nikhil Seth, is Indian indeed. So he has ensured, as well as with many other countries, but particularly in India, that we understand the local realities and that we actually continue to offer resources in several languages, by the way. So if you go to unitar.org and you actually put languages, you will see what we have. But more important than that, perhaps you can just in the search window put India, and you see what things we offer that are particularly adapted to the Indian reality. So yes, you are invited to join us at unitar.org. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also very soon, by end of this month, we are going to open with UNITAR a joint course, which is accessible also for people with disability, which is for developing local DRR strategies. It's a long course of 12 weeks, and UNDRR provides scholarships for those participants interest who would like to more in-depth knowledge on this course. It is especially for, we do scholarship for local authorities, national and local authorities. Thank you, Mr. Mejia, for your presentation and for being with us in this course today. We have 240 participants, and this time we have them in a webinar mode. Last week we were in a more active session in groups, works, and discussions. Thank you very much, Mr. Mejia, again. And let me move on our certificate of this course, how you can be granted a certificate. And for that, my colleague Samuel Dana from UNDESA, UNPOG, will give you some guidance. Over to you, Dana.
Hello.
We hear you very well.
Yes, greetings everybody, and thanks very much for the continued engagement, and thanks very much, Anna, for this wonderful moderation. I would like to quickly go through, I know we've received a lot of questions through emails about the certification and how to go about it. So based on that, just take two quick ones. One is that we want to request all participants who have taken part in this program to submit their exercises. I know we had group exercises and individual exercises that were shared and discussed during the second section especially. And for today's section, there's going to be a take-home assignment. So for that one, we expect that especially for the group 2, the group exercise for session 2, that was previously shared, you could submit it individually by in a week's time. That's next Tuesday, the 20th of April. That's when you can submit before or by then. And with the MCR scorecard, practice exercise and action plan for today's take-home assignment, we think it might require more time, so you can submit it in 2 weeks' time. That's 27th of April. You should have submitted. I know people have already started submitting these and we are receiving them. For the action plan exercise that was mentioned by Anna today, the detailed guidelines will be further shared with you through an email. So don't have to worry. And you can always contact us if you have any questions or comments about how to go about it. So with the assignments which will be submitted, you can submit it through the workspace or through the emails below. So you have this common email thread that comes to you through the workspace or the UNDRR on the email. You can also submit it to Anna through her email or my email. So we have these common emails. I think you have them with you. So you can submit or copy each of us on the assignments you'll be submitting. So with the certification, participants who successfully complete this workshop are going or will be entitled to a certificate of participation upon successful completion, as I mentioned. Then it will bear the logos of the 3 organizing institutions, that's UNDRR, UNPOG, and UNITA CIFAL Jeju. To qualify for this, you should have completed at least 2 sessions. That's out of the 3 sessions to qualify for a certificate. And you should also have submitted your exercises, which we already mentioned. So you can submit that. The certificates will be sent to you by emails. So if you have further inquiries about that, you can send an email to inquire about that. But for the time being, I think when we get a process and you qualify, we just send it right away to you. Thank you very much for your attention, and we look forward to engaging more with you. Thank you. Anna, over to you. Hello?
Thank you, Dana. Yes, thank you, Dana.
Yes.
As Dana mentioned, we will send you by email the instructions for developing a local DRR action plan with the template. It requires a little bit more time, so we will extend until 27th of April. So you have good enough time, and you can reach out to us if you need some support to understand the methodology. For us, as this workshop, it's very important that you acquire the appropriate skills and that you are very confident to support your city in order to develop the local DRR strategy, and we really achieve the objectives of this course. We had in our plans today a presentation from Australia. I received a message, the person is not yet into the workshop. She's having some problems to join the workshop. So what we are going to do, if she cannot join this time, we are going to share her presentation. The experience of Cairns in Australia is to show you how they use the tools and the methodology from this course, and they really apply into the city. Unfortunately, today the person cannot join. It's trying to, but it cannot join. So we will share the good practice as a way for you to have a guidance also in your learning. The learning of the course will not end here today. We will continue the collaboration through the workspace. Most of you are in the workspace, and we will send you the certificates for the course for those who really submit the assignments. So thank you for your participation, and let's move on the closing of this session of today. Let me invite Ambassador Hong Gi Choi, Director of UNITA CIFAL Jeju GITC in Jeju, to give us some closing remarks. Over to you, Ambassador Choi. Ambassador Choi, you have to unmute yourself. just unmute. You still have the mic off? No,
I'm
perfect.
sorry.
Perfect.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I would like to first thank you for your attendance and active participation over the course of 7 days. I am also very grateful to Mr. Alex Mejia for kindly sharing your insights with us today. I hope the online capacity development workshop on disaster risk reduction strategies and digital governance for local resilience has served as informative training sessions to acquire new knowledge, take a new perspective, and develop practical skills that can be used at your work. I believe there were 3 essence of this workshop, including the presentations on the concept of disaster risk reduction, the group exercise to conceptualize policy tools to address local vulnerability, together with some actual cases that emphasize the importance of awareness raising for capacity development. As highlighted a number of times, city and local governments hold the key to overcoming natural and man-made disasters and mobilizing citizen support to build resilience. It is also by the holistic and vertical cooperation that we can achieve sustainable development goals. In this regard, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the local authorities for their continuous commitment to be at the forefront of disaster risk reduction and risk response. Unitaru Jeju International Training Center plans for more capacity building workshop this year on social, economic, and environmental pillars of the SDGs. Some of them will be held in a hybrid format, combining face-to-face participation and virtual interaction to maximize the impact. I would appreciate if you could continue to support our workshop. Based on your interest, CIFAR Jeju will continue to grow as an aspiring training center and make significant contributions to achieving sustainable development for all. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Choi, for your words for this course. And let me give the floor to Mr. Buk-Hyun Shim, the head of UN Project Office on Governance.
Thank you,
Mr.
Anna.
Shim.
Thank you. Good afternoon, evening, and morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to congratulate you all for your successful participation and the completion of this 3-day online capacity development workshop on disaster risk reduction, strategies, and the digital governance for local resilience. I hope you all enjoyed your participation, enhanced your knowledge, and learned many good innovative approaches, strategies, and practices for disaster risk reduction and building resilience. As co-organizers of this online capacity development workshop, it has been a great pleasure to see very active participation and interactions of participants during the various sessions and through your engagement on the workspace. I sincerely appreciate your active engagement and great enthusiasm. I hope this online workshop has provided a valuable opportunity to share knowledge and exchange innovative practices between national, local government officials and all other stakeholders, as well as among academia, private sector, civil society organizations. Since the training toolkit on risk-informed governance and innovative technologies for DRR and resilience was also introduced, I hope you could find some time to review the toolkit and provide your valuable and constructive comments for you to further improve the toolkit. In addition to that, I'd like to say that you can refer to the excellent e-learning course on resilience of local governance, which was developed by UNDRR and UNITAR and the other agencies, as Mr. Alexander Mejia presented in his presentation. Based on the interactive discussions and engagement that transpired over the past sessions, I'd like to highlight a few key takeaways with the policy implications for DRR and the building resilience. First, strengthening risk-informed governance is critical for effective and sustainable DRR and resilience building. An effective risk-informed governance includes such major components as leadership, institutional coordination, empowering local authorities, effective risk communication strategy for ensuring public trust, integrated decision-making through real-time data information sharing, and the stakeholder engagement and partnership are particularly imperative. And you can take note that Ms. Anna Christina Thorland of UNDRR Getty suggested very useful implications on practical strategies and action plans to make local resilience. Second, leveraging frontier technologies and harnessing digital government greatly contribute to risk-informed decision-making and effective response to disasters. Moreover, robust, accurate, and disaggregated data are essential for risk-informed decision-making, and open data and big data analytics enable governments to effectively anticipate, prepare, and respond to risks and disasters. This also requires strengthening data governance for effective data sharing and management, especially the protection of data privacy and data security. Third, strengthening public governance and leveraging technologies and the digital government can contribute to better responding to public health emergencies, including the current COVID-19 pandemic. Engagement of all actors, both at the national and local levels, is especially imperative for timely, efficient, and inclusive response to public health emergencies. Last but not least, the importance of fostering innovation and building partnerships with the private sector and other stakeholders was emphasized as well. Government needs to actively engage with the scientists, researchers, entrepreneurs, and startups, as well as youth and students, to foster innovative collaboration for DRR and building resilience. We hope that you can further share these new ideas and knowledge gained through this online workshop with your colleagues and friends in your country, so that more countries, cities, communities can better address disasters whose impacts are becoming complex and systemic. UNDESA, DPID's UN UNPOC, in partnership with the UNDRR and UNITAR, CIFAR Jeju, and other partners, will continue doing our best to support member states in achieving DRR and building resilience, particularly for sustainable and resilient recovery from pandemic such as COVID-19. We look forward to a continued collaboration with you. Lastly, I would like to close my remarks by extending my sincere appreciation to the co-organizers of this online workshop, UNDRR Getty and UNITAR CIFAR Jeju. Thank you very much, and I wish you all keep staying safe and healthy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shin, for your kind words. We are very happy with this collaboration. And before I give the floor to Sanjaya Bhatia, we are very lucky that we have Miss Sue Campbell from Australia, who finally joined the workshop while we were waiting. And she would like to give us a quick summary of her presentation. I think it's important for participants to hear how this tool has been applied in the city. And after that, we continue with the closing with our last speaker, Sanjaya Bhatia. Ms. Shu, the floor is yours. Your audio. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope people can hear me. I'm in a very difficult location this afternoon. So I was just going to give a very quick summary of our Resilience Scorecard project in Cairns. And maybe if we can move through to the third slide. In the slide pack as we go. This will just explain the background to running the project in Cairns. So, oh great, I'm glad you can hear me. So never mind, yeah, let's not worry too much about what is community resilience. We might run on to the next slide and just look at some of the processes we went through. with putting the scorecard process in place. So the background in Cairns was that I had been running a resilience process for some time, looking holistically at resilience in the Cairns region, but we really had no idea, how well we were doing and just how resilient the region is. So I discovered the scorecard process in communications with Sanjaya and some others, and really liked the way it looked in terms of such a holistic application. And so we decided to move ahead with this in kind of two ways. One of those was in taking a closer look at some of our geographic communities and communities of interest in terms of their take on resilience within their own region and their own area, and then to look to apply that to the relevant areas of the scorecard, and then look at those other aspects of resilience that the scorecard covers. And we did this in a number of different ways through active community engagement and surveying, as well as working with our local disaster management group. So if we could move through to the next slide.
Monsieur, we hear a lot of noise in your background.
Yeah, I can't do much about it. It's just sort of where I am. It's a bit tricky. So I'm really sorry if it's a bit difficult to hear me. I'll try and sit a bit closer to the computer so you can hear me a bit better. This is a little bit about the background to Cairns. It's a very transient city. Until COVID, we had a huge tourist population, lots of changes, people moving in and out, lots of visitors, but no real disasters for a very long time. And so complacency has been a huge problem. If we just move through to the next slide. This was really this question about, how resilient are we? We've got all these things that we're doing, we've got all these activities we're undertaking, but you don't really know how well we're going in the resilience background. And we wanted to develop a collective action plan based on applying the scorecard across our local government area. And this involved a lot of community engagements to talk to community members, as well as using our disaster management partners to assess themselves in terms of their own resilience and how resilient they thought they were, using all those resilience indicators in the scorecard. So next slide. We're very keen to also apply community engagement principles. So some of you may be familiar with the IAP2 spectrum of public participation, which we applied in working from our, with our different stakeholders and different community partners, and collaborate with them. So here's an indication of some of the community engagements we went through at local shopping centres to talk to community members and get their input to some of the scorecard criteria. Next slide. We also did some community mapping, so we could actually look at where our most vulnerable communities are, and applied this companion approach through an organisation called the Torrens Resilience Institute to talk to members in these different suburbs of Cairns about their perceptions of community resilience. So for those unfamiliar with this approach, it's an Australian development. We've provided in the slide on the Torrens scorecard where you can get that information to pull out some of the sort of social resilience in a bit more detail. So yeah, next slide, and then the one afterwards, I think too, please. So here's the guide to the Torrens scorecard. And if you look at this, you'll be able to sort of see how it ties in with the United Nations scorecard as well. Actually connecting with people and asking them questions was very popular. And we used a 10-question survey, which drew on some of the scorecard criteria to get the answers. A lot of people said they really didn't want to do it. They hated the council. They didn't want to do the awful survey, but most people really enjoyed it. And we got some great intelligence through that. So next slide. So here's a little indication of the survey. Obviously, we needed to know where people were from, but lots of connections here about how connected people thought their own area is, what can happen in the area, how prepared are you at home, where would you find information and emergency services, and what qualities could you bring to your community around resilience to assist. So next slide. And here's just some photos of myself and people doing the different surveys in different locations in community settings. So you can see this is an area we've got some quite big urban communities, as well as more rural settings with community markets, community shows, those sorts of things. Next slide. So this was really a big learning exercise about what people in our communities know and think about disaster management and disaster preparedness. And we really got a great insight into sort of lack of knowledge in lots of ways. So whilst people might tell us that they're prepared and they've done different things, they actually didn't know a lot about where their nearest emergency services were located, or where they could really get useful information about what they might need to do. So that was really the community gathering side of the exercise. Next slide. So here was our introduction to what was the UN ISDR scorecard. We've now obviously moved on a bit from this. And what I'm giving you there is a participant activity that I took to a resilience conference in Australia to give people an idea of the detail that we're getting into with the UN scorecard, and the sorts of things people need to consider when they're looking at these criteria. And the interesting thing about this essential is that it wasn't a question that we could answer well in hands. It's been incredibly difficult, for example, to find out the extent of insurance coverage for domestic housing. And we've paid separately for a major research project to investigate this essential. So it has had some really interesting outcomes for us in terms of moving forward. Next slide. So this is what we've been examining in this series of webinars. Really, it was also the way we ran this as a very collaborative project. We asked our disaster management group members and partners to assess their own levels of resilience according to the criteria. We really had to encourage them to be honest, because everybody wanted to score a 5 and look as if they were doing the right thing. But of course, in fact, that's not the reality of life. And having to think about these things individually and then share them with everybody else is quite challenging for a lot of people. Next slide. And I've just described some of those challenges here. So I think a lot of people were quite suspicious about the depth of questioning that we were going into. They thought there was some kind of weird background agenda, and it just wasn't the sort of questioning we'd gone through before. So it was actually a very insightful process for a lot of those organisations and very useful for us as a local disaster management group. Next slide. Nearly done. So, most interestingly, I guess this is sort of what we found. One of the unsurprising but confirmed outcomes was that the local government, the council, is doing most of the work and leading most of that effort, and that needs to be more spread around. We did really identify some gaps in process around looking at single hazards too much at the time rather than multiple hazard planning for the region. The sorts of information limitations I described around insurance were repeated in other gaps as well, and in other criterions like emergency fuel supplies and lack of knowledge about ecosystem services. And we had a real sort of validation process, as I said before, around people's engagement in the whole process very honestly. Next slide. So I've pretty much described the process already about sort of how we went through this with those community engagements, but also a bit of an iterative process with our disaster management partners and stakeholders to do some initial assessments, then do some workshopping to discuss the assessments, and then do another series of workshops to validate those scores and make sure we were being really realistic about what we did. And next slide. And here we have the outcomes. So obviously we've achieved a really good baseline measurement across the resilience spectrum using the scorecard. We had a great series of proofs, I guess, about the things that we didn't know and what we could do in the future. And what I would really like to say about this is that we've managed to fund all those research into all those gaps in the time since we finished this in late 2017. And we're now moving forward into rerunning the scorecard process using the updated scorecard with the public health addendum to see where we're at and how our scores now relate to that baseline process. So it's been enormously valuable. It's one of the best things I've done. It's really raised awareness of these issues in other parts of Australia. And we won an Australasian Award for this project a few years ago. So I hope I've shown you the value in putting this into practice. And I'm really happy to assist anybody that's thinking about doing this themselves in the future with any support and advice that might be possible. I'm very sorry I was late and I had some difficulties this afternoon, and thanks so much for letting me join the webinar.
Thank you very much, Ms. Campbell. This is the reality of how we can use the tools we were learning over the 3 sessions of the course. And thank you for giving the possibility to support other cities in this work and your participation despite the challenges to join the course today. Let me finalize our last and closing speaker of the session today. We already have 2 speakers who have closed the session, and we will finish with Sanjaya Bhatia. Over to you, Mr. Sanjaya.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Ambassador Choi and Mr. Shim, for your remarks just a while ago. I'd also like to thank Alexander Mejia for his intervention on behalf of UNITAR, and especially thank Sue Campbell for being able to make it. It's a very powerful message that you give of a city actually using the tools and what you have learned from it. And we hope to in the future maybe spend more time on such a discussion. So thank you all. I'd also like to thank all the behind the scenes, Anna, Jenny, Samuel, all of them who have worked very hard to make this possible. We had more than 200 participants throughout, which goes to show the value of the program. If this was an in-person program, it would be impossible to have more than 200. Today we had 240, 250 participants. It would be impossible. So this is the value of the virtual organization, that we are able to reach out to many more. And I do hope that all the participants will be able to follow up on what they picked up through this course. We are here to help you if you need some more coordination or support for capacity building of local governments in the future. Let us know. We'll be available to help you as best as we can. I think I'd just like to pick up one point that Sue was mentioning, that when you do the resilience work, there's a lot of trying to understand, why are you doing this? Is it a trap? Why are you doing the scoring and so on? And that is a realization that we all have to face, that resilience is a long-term effort. We can't say ever that we are resilient. It will always, the scenario will keep changing, and we have to keep working hard to understand what are the new risks and how we can manage them. And also, along with the risk assessment and the risk planning, there's a big role for communications and information, and making citizens aware of what are the different facets of risk, so that they can also understand that risk is not just about a fire and fighting a fire, but there are so many other perspectives. For example, many people now, we have all learned through COVID that even a health emergency is such a big risk, and it can impact more than one sector. So the information and communication part is also very important. And I hope through this long exercise that we have gone through so many days, you have all picked up some good messages that you can share in your office, with your colleagues, in your families, in your schools, in your universities, so that you can spread the message on resilience far and wide. With that, I thank you all. Goodbye.
Thank you, Sanjaya. With this, we conclude our third and last session of the workshop towards developing the local DRR strategies. You have the 3 records available, and we will share more guidance on the final assignment after this workshop by email to the group. And those who requires to get all presentations through the workspace, you will receive the guidance. Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon to everyone, or good end of the day, of the morning. Thank you and goodbye.